Okay, amazing. Hi, everyone. Everyone is doing well. Be starting the session shortly, just waiting for a couple of people to join, then we'll kick off. But in the meantime, would love to hear where you guys are checking in from. So you could put it on the chat box, and yeah, would love to know where you are and which hub you're from, ideally. Thank you. I hope I'm audible and everyone can hear me. Just put a thumbs up if I'm clear. Amazing. So let's just give it from 2 more minutes and we shall kick off. But in the meantime, kindly feel free to put where you're coming from, where you're calling in from. I can see Khadija is from UDICTI. I think that's in Tanzania. Mariam from Susa. Love to know where that is. Seeing Simon from Juba, Africa. Amazing. Okay, amazing. I think we can kick off now. Welcome everyone to this edition's masterclass. And what we'll be going through this time is how to do effective mentorship, ideally how to become a part-time co-founder to the startups that we support in our hubs. And yeah, looking forward to share my experience and how we currently provide mentorship at Startup Africa. So maybe before I start my presentation, I would love to just briefly introduce you to the kind of work I'm doing and how the mentorship idea comes into play. So, my name is Noah. I have a background in engineering, and for the past 4 years now, I've been supporting startups ideally to start, grow, and scale. Currently, at Startup, I lead the tech venture support, and we provide venture support and venture development support to technology startups across East Africa. Just in Uganda here, we have currently about 10 startups in our portfolio. And what we do is we invest and ideally give support for about 2 years or more, depending on how a startup has developed over the duration of support that we've given them. And based on the learnings that we've been having recently, where we act more like part-time co-founders, because why we use that word is it's what you call putting skin in the game, where you actually contribute to the startup's progress by actively supporting, but also contributing to the kind of work they do beyond just the conversations, right? And here I'll try to share with you some of the learnings we've had, how it all started, how it's going, and already share some tips and tricks on how you can apply it to your own hubs. And yeah, would love to engage after, have a brief Q&A to see how some of you have been doing it. I'm sure some have figured it out, or at least some have tested it. So it's all about learning and sharing from each other. So let me just quickly share my screen. Okay. Amazing. So yeah, welcome once again to the mentorship with a co-founder mindset session where we want to take you from zero to one in supporting the startups within your portfolio or within your hubs. So yeah, please kindly continue sharing your where you're joining in from. Would love for you guys to also share your LinkedIn. I'd love to connect on LinkedIn and yeah, continue learning from each other. And yeah. Today's agenda is to first of all understand what is actually mentorship when it comes to the startup realm and understand why East African startups need mentorship, right? And why it's important for hubs to be at the center of any startup success within the ecosystem. And from there, we'll go to seeing how we need to approach the support based on investor and customer lenses, because however much we are working with startups, it's paramount that we see it from both sides, right? And from there, we are going to now start on how to start and structure mentorship for those who want to now start applying the part-time co-founder kind of methodology. And yeah, we'll try to understand also how setting up systems is not the same as doing the work, and also get some learnings from other global accelerators, hubs, or incubators. I know these words are usually mixed up and interchanged, but just understanding that mentorship in that lens is quite important. And after that, we'll look at how to set up metrics and avoid pitfalls, and we shall end with a brief action plan, then also Q&A, right? So before we start, I would like us to set up a common ground for first defining what mentorship or what a mentor is, right? So usually these three words are used interchangeably, a mentor, a coach, or an advisor, right? But let's first demystify and share our experiences on how each of this has affected us, right? So maybe quickly on a chatbot, right? On the chat box, can we put which one we are currently? Are we a mentor? Are we a coach, or are we an advisor to the startup that we support? So I'm sure, or most of us at least, support one startup. So I'd love to hear if we're supporting any startups. What are we? Do you think we're a coach? Do we think we're a mentor or an advisor? So I'll give you guys like 30 seconds to put it on the chat box. So we can put on the chat box which one we are. Are you a mentor? So I can see Khadija is a coach. Amazing. Um, love to hear from more people. So I personally, I think I'm a mentor. Okay, Mariam is also a coach. Yeah, I would love to hear from two more people. Okay, I can see Biaka is a coach as well. Okay, so let's start by first defining and seeing the differences, right? I can see also Edith is a mentor, Joseph is a mentor. Nice. So we could start.
So maybe I can quickly run you.
Okay. So a mentor is usually a person who has a bit more deeper relationship with the founder or the startup, right? So it's not just on the level of performance and doing work, but rather you know much more deeper than just a day-to-day business, right? So you're in touch with how their livings are, how they're doing in their personal lives, right? Because the mentorship goes way far than just providing support. So it's ideally pattern sharing and looking at or being invested at the long-term growth, right? So when you look at mentors, usually even for those who have career mentors, right, they're invested in your long-term journey over how you support or how you grow, right? A coach is usually performance oriented, right, and they ask more than they tell. So when you're looking at a coach, they are more focused on you need to perform, you need to push your revenue up, you need to get more users, you need to fundraise, right? but a coach relatively or sometimes is not long term, and they come in for a specific kind of work. So if they come for, let's say, fundraising, they'll come and coach you on how to fundraise, but then life moves on, right? Lastly is an advisor. An advisor is a specific domain expert. So someone who has relative experience in the field of work. So for example, if someone is working in the AI space, that person has um, enough experience on how to talk about the specific field that they're working on so that they could help, and they're usually compensated through equity or different kinds of benefits within the company, right? So now that we have this idea, right, we can clearly differentiate what's the difference between a mentor, a coach, and an advisor. um, so why mentorship matters in East Africa. So I was reading this column earlier this month, and they said that investors, startup investors, are calling for mentorship to ensure that growth of Kenyan startups are established, right? So by the time investors look at the need or the benefit of mentorship, it's quite a crucial thing to understand that most startups need support, especially in East Africa. And the reason is, since usually these kind of startups are started by younger people with less experience, whether it's in work or different kinds of exposure, they lack a specific angle that they need support with, or it could be context within the problem that you're solving, dealing with investors, dealing with hiring, all these things, right? So you as a mentor, you are coming in with a certain experience, right? With a certain, not just experience, but openness to support, which means that since two heads are better than one, you're helping them achieve more, understand more, and progress more faster than what they would have if they started late, right? Or if they were doing it alone. So some of the reasons why mentorship matters is number one, as you saw the article, thousands of Kenyan startups, but not just Kenyan startups, East Africa wide, whether you're calling from Rwanda, Congo, South Sudan, right, Ethiopia or Tanzania, all startups are facing challenges, not just in terms of investment, but also support, right? So this stems from lack of having an experienced person, whether it's in the startup world or a specific domain, provide a specific support, right? Secondly, is that a lot of hubs across Africa are not funded well. And the reason for this is to get funded, most of the credibility comes from which startups you've supported and how they have succeeded, right? And we will look at one of the success stories from an organization called Y Combinator, of how they started by just having their own investments, but eventually started raising from external investors to run their programs, right? But lastly is the benefits that these startups will have by getting access to this mentorship, whether it is access to expertise, networks, signals, or even emotional support, right? And yeah, before we start the session, I just want you guys to reflect and think about this question, right? If your entire salary this year, for example, were invested in a specific startup you mentor, how would that change your approach, right? So uh, just look at that earnings and see it as an investment going in, because when you actually look at that, you actually, the kind of resources that's going in for getting mentors, it's indirectly a support or an investment to the startup, even though you're not giving them cash, right? But you're providing that through human resource. So ask yourself, if you saw that in terms of like financial or monetary value, right? How would that change, right? So I just want you guys to reflect on that for the next 30 seconds. As I put on a video for Y Combinator, one of the world's successful accelerators. Even though it's an accelerator, we have a lot to learn from it, because they not only invest and support startups, but they provide the kind of mentorship that sees the world-class success that we see in the world right now, right? So yeah, as we go to the video right now, let's just reflect that how would our support change if people, or if the mentors started seeing it from the perspective of um, uh, the financial or monetary investment, instead of just looking at it from the aspect of, you know, providing the mentorship, right? Because always that flips a script in terms of how we support our startups. So next up, we're going to briefly check out this video, and from there we'll jump back into the session, right? So let me just share my screen again. And if you have any questions, just put it on the chat box, and my team members will ping me. Then I'll come back to answer the questions. Okay, so let's check out this video. It's about 8 minutes, but it's an interesting one.
In the startup world, there are so many.
This AI tool will take your idea and create a complete book, complete with design, images.
Go. In the startup world, there are so many bright ideas that often go on to become some of the biggest and best companies and products around the world. But more often than not, those companies and products wouldn't have got to where they are today without some kind of funding to kickstart the business, helping the idea to grow. So today we're looking at Y Combinator, an American seed money startup accelerator which launched in March 2005. Ever heard of Stripe, Reddit, Twitch, Airbnb, DoorDash, or Dropbox? Thought you might have. All these companies saw funding through the Y Combinator Accelerator program, which saw them become behemoths in their sectors. And there's over 2,000 other companies that have taken the same journey. But what actually is Y Combinator? What does the program consist of? And how did Y Combinator become one of the most sought after venture accelerators in the world? Here's how it happened. Y Combinator today is known for providing seed funding for startups, early stage capital that pays the bills to get the business going. They run 2 3-month programs in Silicon Valley where they invest around $120,000 in startups they think will succeed, acquiring small stakes and getting the startups correctly set up legally to help with future funding and success. During the 3-month program, they work intensively with companies, getting them into.
So when you see the first part, they don't just provide the support, but the moment they invest, they have skin in the game. So they actually work intensely with you, like one by one, right? Not just giving you trainings, but actually connecting you with a specific mentor that provides you the kind of support based on your industry, right? So I'll be pausing to the video every once in a while to just highlight a couple of things the person is saying.
To shape and refining pitches for potential investors. But initially, when the business first started, things were quite different. Y Combinator was founded in 2005 by Paul Graham, Jessica Livingston, Trevor Blackwell, and Robert Tappan Morris. The group came together after either trying to join a VC fund or begin angel investing, thinking, why not do it ourselves? Graham put in $100,000, Blackwell and Morris put in $50,000 each, and Livingston quit her job to join them in running the business, and thus Y Combinator, or Cambridge Seed as it was initially known, was founded. Y Combinator decided they wanted to fund startups synchronously. Not because it would be better, but because they wanted to learn how to be angel investors. And by convincing undergrads to spend their summer working on their startup, they felt it was a good enough reason not to feel guilty encouraging them to do it. So they launched the Summer Founders Program in 2005 and found that the length and structure of a summer program was perfect, so much so that it hasn't really changed to this day. When they first launched, the founders came up with the Y Combinator effect, which described the moment that someone realized that YC wasn't actually that lame. The first summer, people who came to speak felt it was like a Boy Scout talk, but by the time they left, they actually thought some of the companies might succeed. That's why YC likes funding companies that are considered a bit silly, because that's how they were dismissed originally. Initially, they started running 2 programs per year, one in Boston and another in Silicon Valley, choosing the latter because of the weather, the density of startup people, and they didn't want anyone else to copy their idea and become the YC of Silicon Valley. They only just managed to get a building in Mountain View, and the first dinner they had to tell founders not to touch the walls because the paint was still wet. So far from perfect. But by 2009, they cancelled the Boston program to focus all their resources on Silicon Valley. And that same year, Sequoia Capital led a $2 million investment round to enable Y Combinator to invest in 60 companies per year, and 1 year later, they led an $8.25 million funding round to increase that number of investments. Out of 8,000 applicants,
So Sequoia Capital is just one of the biggest VC or investment companies in the US. And here you get to see that by the time there's a proven track record or proven credibility on how to support startups, investors actually start trusting you with their investments to get potential pipeline. Because I think hubs are at the center of creating pipeline for a lot of investors or stakeholders, right? And you get to see that once they started this summer school where founders would come and be in one place, they would actually practically guide and support these founders, and also bring experienced investors or founders to give them some kind of support. So they don't only provided hands-on support, but also any kind of networking and connections, which we will see later that it's also a critical part of mentorship.
around 300 startups get invited to fly out for an interview. Once accepted to the program, the firms receive a $120,000 investment for 7% of the business, and the 12-week program begins. Successful applicants fly out to Silicon Valley to set themselves up to work on their business 24/7, in what many describe is their most productive 12 weeks of their lives. Despite this, the program itself only consists of about 3 formal occasions: a weekly dinner, office hours with the Y Combinator team, and demo day. The weekly dinner consists of getting all the startups together into a cafeteria-style room with a stage in the middle upon which well-known speakers, such as Mark Zuckerberg, Michael Bloomberg, and Andrew Mason, have spoken, with someone different for each dinner. The office hours consist of discussing business plans, launching the business, pitch preparation, the future, and figuring out how to bring products and services out to the public. These office hours are key in the build-up to demo day to plan and prepare, but they're available to every business all year round. Even those who came through the Y Combinator machine 15 years ago still speak to the partners often.
So when you look at the partners, they refer to the mentors as partners. And as you said, even way after the program ends, these people have an open door where they constantly engage the mentors over different matters, whether it's selling the company, fundraising, hiring, right? So it gets to see that it's more relationship based, more than just beyond the specific program duration.
Towards the end of the program, Y Combinator take their equity stake in the business, which values the startup at $1.7 million more or less, and the 3-month program then culminates in Demo Day, which has grown from a crowd of 15 people in 2005 to over 1,000 investors today. So it's kind of a big deal.
Getting a shipping quote just got so much easier. Your competitive shipping rate, like
In the room are numerous startup investors, possibly the highest concentration all in one room that you'd find anywhere in the world, all looking for the next big thing. As far as startups themselves are concerned, there's nothing specific that they need to say or do. They're all at different stages after all. The goal is purely to present their product or service as convincingly as possible in 2.5 minutes, which might lead to further introductory talks post-presentation. Y Combinator then help with the fundraising process, helping them understand who the most reliable investors are and which might be the best fit. This, coupled with the fact that the startups are already known quantities, means that it sometimes leads to higher valuations due to serious price competition. Even if the startups don't come away with any funding, they have at least gained great contacts with whom to restart discussions at a later date. And despite a common query being that YC doesn't fund solo founders, it's a misconception. Every year, over 10% of businesses funded have solo founders. But that being said, they do suggest bringing on co-founders or a wider team, because at the end of the day, with all things being equal, it's just a lot easier to start a company as part of a team. You might be sat there thinking that the main takeaway is funding, and that is a very important part of the process, but there's more to Y Combinator than just a cash injection. In fact, many of the startups that pass through Y Combinator don't actually need the money. It obviously helps to keep the lights on, but that's not what they came for. The partners work side by side with the founders, helping them to see the direction in which their business should go, and they answer all questions, from the obscene to the mundane. The Y Combinator effect also means that investors will treat YC startups well if they want to be invited back for future opportunities. Y Combinator also help with legal documentation, patents, and if necessary, mediate disputes between disgruntled co-founders. The other often unseen part is the massive alumni network of startup founders, through which you can find a place to stay, a freelance employee, or a connection at a specific company. Y Combinator themselves see this as an amazing byproduct they didn't even think of at first, but funding startups every 6 months evidently creates a huge network. Y Combinator has now been running for over 15 years and has put over 2,000 businesses through its rigorous process, and it's been worth it, with around 20 businesses being valued in excess of $1 billion. It affects so many startups that it almost acts as an index fund for the VC world, offering great exposure, but at the same time, they try to interfere as little as possible, not taking board seats and allowing all businesses to act independently, because more often than not, one of the main factors for someone launching a startup in the first place is independence. And that's how it happened. Thanks for watching.
Nice. So I hope you guys have seen, I think, highlighted the last part of the video, which is more often than not, people do not come to Y Combinator because they need the money, right? Of course, money is important for a startup, especially an early stage company that has not started generating revenue. But the most crucial part is the kind of support the partners provide, whether it's connecting them with relevant people, whether investors, policymakers, potential partnerships with big companies, right? And other kinds of disputes that they might solve. For example, usually in a startup, there are usually disputes between co-founders. So they provide an end-to-end, more or less a holistic support uh, at on demand for the startups that are that come to their programs. So you get to see that Y Combinator so far has not succeeded because they've got a lot of capital to invest. Of course, capital was part of the process, but why they have succeeded is because they have um, really invested in their mentorship and the kind of support that they give to startups, more or less becoming part-time co-founders as well, right? And as they said, they do not interfere with their day-to-day activities. They set up systems to actually support the startups as they grow, right? So they don't become reliant on them, but they just become catalysts to the growth and the scaling of the startups. So now back to our, just give me a second. Okay, so now we'll jump into how to actually start mentoring teams, right? So the first part as a mentor is that you have to start seeing from different angles, not just from your angle as a mentor, but you have to see from the angle of an investor, from the angle of a customer, and bridge those two gaps because the two crucial parts of any startup is the customer because they're the ones that eventually grow the company through paying for the products or services that they sell, but also the investor because they're the early believers of startups that initially inject capital for the businesses, right? So investors lens usually could be in terms of capital efficiency, milestones, and risk mitigation, right? On the customer lens, it has to be how do I get value from this startup? What's the usability? What's the retention, right? So your role as a mentor is to bridge all those discoordinated processes and different kinds of roles and try to form a more of a bigger vision, right? So you are the person at the front and center of the startup's progress, right? Who is also usually unbiased. So when you're usually starting a mentorship program, you have to first of all understand and map out a founder's needs, right? Set a duration and pick a thematic track. What this means is usually founders should know, or at least you should discuss what their need is. Sometimes they're really technically good that they don't need technical support. What they might need is networks to investors, right? Or sometimes they might need support with hiring or coming up with contractual agreements. So you as a mentor, you have to understand how do I actually, first of all, understand the needs of the startups? And it's usually diagnosing and understanding at what level the founder is and what will take him to the next level and what are the biggest bottlenecks, right? Secondly is now also selection and matching because if you saw the Y Combinator process, they usually connect you with partners that are either having specific domain expertise on the startup or they're people who have an understanding of how the work that's being done. But also the last one is you have particular interest in the industry or sector, right? So if, for example, I'm connecting one of you guys to a startup founder, but you inherently are not interested in fintech, right? Or you're not interested in agri-tech. You mentoring them, you might be biased already, right? So just the way I said that, look at as this as something that you're investing your salary on. how would you treat it? You're definitely going to choose something that excites you, right? So you have to match both the skills matrix, the sector, but also the founder stage. Lastly, is setting up goals in order to put up metrics that could help you track whether you're actually proving to be fruitful or supportive to the founders, right? So as you can see on the picture here, I was in the field with one of the startups I support, where we were actually doing customer engagement, right? And sometimes why you have to do this as a mentor is you have to get your own independent view of situations without the bias of even the founders themselves, right? So whether it's engaging a particular customer or engaging a potential investor or engaging a potential partner, right? You have to have an independent view of all the process because just talking to the founder is not usually sufficient, right? But one thing that you also have to remember is you should not do the work of the founder because the whole point of a founder is they want independence, they want to have control over their businesses. But what you should do is actually setting up systems that will help them structure their work, right? So how you can start by doing this is one, at least having a consistent routine check-ins to just check up on how things are going, what's new, even if there's no major update, right? Checking on their personal lives, and then having a shared KPI dashboard, which means if both of you understand what is the responsibility of each person, right, you're clearly able to track and see the progress of the uh, uh, support you're giving them. Lastly, is constantly having a resource wiki and an intros tracker, which means for you to also show the founder that you are doing your part of the work, there has to be some form of a tracker that basically logs the information, right? Because let's say time from now, if a founder comes and says, I didn't get value from you, for example, you always can look back and say, hey, but we did this. This is what we tried out. This is what we tested. And lastly is just the way you have Y Combinator office hours, you can structure your own kind of process where you actually have a dedicated time where you work with founders, right? Whether it's in the field, what I'm doing, or whether it's from the offices or from your customer's place, right? But always understand that your work as a mentor is not to do the work yourself, right? That's why you're called a part-time co-founder. Your role as a mentor is to come put or set up the infrastructure or the system and leave so that the founders take it themselves, right? So your goal should come, understand a problem, solve it, helping them solve it, and leave it to them to continue doing it. So at the end, it's really important and it's different from one startup to the other, right? But you need to measure what actually matters. When you look at the success KPIs, are you measuring how they're going to increase their revenue? Hence, you're helping them with the distribution of their solution. Or are you helping them tracking user growth, follow-on funding, or net promoter score of founders? So you have to understand these KPIs, but also sometimes have qualitative assessment, right? Usually you might find like a university student might not be confident when they're speaking to investors, right? So your goal should be, okay, what should I do as a mentor to help them with that? Is it organizing as much investor score as possible to help them increase their self-esteem? Is it going to be engaging them in a certain public speaking course? I'm not sure. But how do you actually help them also increase on their qualitative side, whether it's clarity or network depth, right? So having those things to measure, you're also clearly being motivated to see that your progress is not going, or the kind of support you're giving is not going to waste, but also that the kind of support you're giving is actually being appreciated or used by the founders that you are supporting. But what are the actual pitfalls when it comes to startups? So the first one is following more of a consulting approach instead of actually something that's hands-on, right? So if a founder comes and tells you, hey, I'm trying to hire someone, but I'm unable to come up with a job description, what's the difference between telling them, hey, go and look at this, or like just giving them a directive, or actually sitting down with them to come up with a contract, or just helping them find out the information hand in hand? What this does is it changes you from being a mentor. I mean, it changes you from being more like a boss to actually a friend or an accomplice. So you have to look at that in terms of not being more on the consultative side, but actually putting your like rolling up your sleeves and supporting them where it's needed. Secondly is I think mismatched expectations, which means usually when you have expectations that are seen by, let's say, one of the founders, and what you're providing them is not directly linked to the kind of support that they need, there's usually disappointments that come, yeah? Sorry, there's a bit of a background noise. Okay. Lastly is founders listening to too many voices, right? If you have multiple mentors supporting a single startup, they're usually going to be not just a conflict of interest, but rather just conflicting voices on what to prioritize, what to do. And this is really hard because it not only confuses the founder, but it also makes it a hard time for there to be progress because there's so many things to do simultaneously that might not be effective. Lastly is ignoring local context. Let's assume you're supporting a specific startup from Uganda and the startup is in Kenya and they're building a fintech product, for example. If you don't know the regulatory challenges or the specific customers that are being served there, it's sometimes hard to give them a more tailored support because you lack a specific local context, whether it's geographical, cultural, or any of that, which means you have to take an extra step to actually do the research and act like a co-founder and find out this information, whether it's through consulting, research, watching videos, and all that stuff to really empathize with the kind of context you're dealing with. So, how can we move forward from here, right? How can we start trying out this effective mentorship plan so that we get to actually provide hands-on support? One is let's audit our current mentor pool, right? Try to understand how is it that we actually have calls. Is it just having once a week meeting and just asking them, what have you done? Why didn't you do this? Then you say, okay, next week you should do this and leave. But actually understanding where the gaps might be. When was the last time you went out to the field with them? When was the last time you engaged an investor and connected them to someone valuable, right? And after that, then start piloting this kind of mentorship, maybe starting this June, where you actually now say, okay, if there's this promising startup that I need to support, I need to first understand what are their needs. So you diagnose that. And for the coming 12 weeks, you have specific KPIs or dashboard to follow up on and see how you can provide that support, right? So what's critical here is that the expectations should not be mismatched. The support coming from you should actually be valued and needed by the founder. But also, lastly, is that you should be patient with the kind of outcome sometimes that come, right? Because if the goal is to help a startup find a problem solution fit, it might take you 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months, right? But being that or knowing that the selection process you had was quite vigorous and that startup you're working with is a long-term investment, it becomes critical that you are actually invested in the long-term growth of the startup. When you look at Y Combinator, they are very critical with how they support startups, which makes them more invested in the long run because they've done the right due diligence that could help them achieve the kind of success that they want, right? So before we jump on the second segment of the tips that I'll be providing, maybe I can just check if there are any questions so far. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions so far, so maybe let me continue, but feel free. My team members will ping me if there are any questions. Um, okay, so what are some of the effective mentorships that you need to follow in order to really support the startups that you have when it comes to, providing hands-on support, right? Really embracing and embodying that part-time co-founder role. I think the first step is to actually build rapport with the mentees, right? You know how they say usually co-founders are like, it's more like a marriage. If you have a co-founder, and now I would say that for the you as a mentor, you're more like the in-laws or people who are families to the newlyweds, which means you must have some kind of rapport, understanding of who you're working with, right? So the first thing should be establishing trust and understanding. And to do this, you need to break the ice and have some kind of familiarity between yourselves, right? If you engage it in the form of just a professional aspect where you just come, do your meeting and leave, also the founder would be compelled to not share all the information with you, right? Which means you have to provide or build that rapport to understand where the founder is coming from and understand why they're doing what they're doing, right? And by having this kind of engagement, you usually loosen up the founder's understanding of who you are, and they're open to share most of their challenges, however deep they might be. Secondly is building a roadmap, which is quite important. I think a roadmap is something that shows you, okay, what needs to be done as a mentor, what needs to be done as a person who can practically apply their skills to actually help a startup progress quickly. So we will see some of the roadmaps that you can build. But also lastly is how do you effectively build teamwork and stress management within a team? Because usually a startup is a very high stress environment. You're always getting rejected. There are a lot of challenges that you face along the way. And one of the core goals of a mentor should be to always, how can I say, you're more like a lubrication, you're more like an engine oil that cools down the stress, which means you constantly have to look at how to loosen up the stress and engage founders in a way that could be more therapeutic and reduce their stress levels, right? So, um, for example, this is a specific roadmap, right? So let's say the kind of founders come and they tell you, hey, I need, like, let's say it's a program or you've invested them or something, right? So you first need to identify at what level do those people lie. Are they still in problem identification? Are they still gathering, doing research and information gathering? Are they in idea and concept development, right? Are they doing feasibility analysis, prototype development, testing or selling the product that they have, or iteration, right? You can even break it down in terms of like the different stages of a startup. Are you still trying to achieve problem solution fit? Are you still trying to go through problem market fit? And by understanding this, you know what your contribution will be, which means if you say that your focus or their focus right now is to develop a prototype, then what kind of support can you give them? Is it going to be providing them with, let's say, product development or product management support to help them progress through their product quickly? Is it going to be doing customer reviews with them to see what the customers might or might not like? If it's still in the problem identification level, what can you do as a mentor? Is it going to be connecting them with the experts in the field or with other founders that you know? Because remember, in that video, they said that Y Combinator really capitalized on the network effect. The more founders they worked with, the more investors they worked with, they started growing their network to even other industries, whether it's an accountant, whether it's a legal person. And your role as a mentor in the long run is going to be how many problems can you solve for the founder with just a phone call or with just a text, which means that your role goes beyond just providing support to the founder, but also capitalizing on that experience over time to make your work much easier and much more effective, right? So understand whichever startup you're supporting, understand at which level of this roadmap they're in, and how you'll be practically contributing beyond just giving them directives or consultancies, right? So is it going to be connecting them to an important person that will help them in that matter? Is it going to be helping them build a product? Is it going to be helping them analyze the customer feedback, right? Uh, sorry. So we have to be critical with all those things. And next up is, as I said, the first and most critical tip is know where the team needs to get support, right? Is the goal support of a prototype? Is it fundraising, right? By understanding and having these critical questions, you're able to also know what your focus is, what your contribution should be. So I urge all the mentors here that starting now, just think about what is that thing that my startup requires immediately. I mean, I can, for all the active startups I'm supporting right now, at least I can mention one need that they have this past week that I'm supporting them with. One of them needs to, we've installed trackers to certain vehicles and they need some kind of analysis to understand how the product be developed, right? One of the team member has hired one of the founders has hired a new team member and I'm going to support them with onboarding the new hired person. One of the team members is setting up a system that could help him track, for example, credits. And now I'm also providing more feedback as as a customer, right? Which means through this all startups, at least I know what's their priority and what my contribution will be for that specific priority, right? So let's make sure that we know at least where the startups need the support and know that how we can support it, and it's clear on both sides that that's what's going to be needed. The second one is doing some pre-work. As I said, the most common or crucial pitfall is supporting where you don't have context, right? So you're talking about health tech, but you don't have a health background, for example. It doesn't mean that it's not easy to, it doesn't mean that it's easy to learn, but at least doing some pre-work to understand what startups are doing in the industry, what gaps there are, reading some research, doing some pre-work gives you enough context to at least contribute meaningfully to the work, right? A lot of these things usually are undermined because it's easy to have an opinion on something based on what you know, but sometimes understanding why is it the way it is takes a bit more empathy. I'm sure all of us here, or most of us, know the design thinking process. And one of the first steps for the design thinking process is how do you empathize with your customers? How do you go inside the shoes of your customers and feel it? That's how it's different from sympathizing. So by having that, by doing that pre-work, you're doing your part of the role. Whether it's talking to previous founders, customers, industry experts, you're able to at least fit yourself in the shoes of those customers and speak from a point of knowledge instead of just, a point from just giving your opinion. So that's the second tab. So just to remind you of the first two. Number one is contribute where your contribution is needed, right? And the second one is do some pre-work and have context when you're providing the support. And sometimes, by the way, it's okay to say that you don't know. It's not a must that it's not a must that you need to know who or what to support on immediately, but knowing that you can't do it means that maybe your support is to connect them with someone who knows, right? So make sure that at least you know those simple details and you're able to at least provide that, provide that support even indirectly when you're not knowledgeable about the industry. Thirdly is showing up and staying there. Remember, guys, if you've committed, if you said that, hey, I've selected the startup, they have a potential, and they know that they will reach somewhere one time, don't easily abandon on them. Don't come for a limited time and tell them to do stuff and go, right? Actually act like their co-founder and not just be available to help them when you're it's your own schedule, right? There are times when I have a call with the founder at 11 midnight, right? There are times when it's a weekend and I have to go to the field. It's hard work, but it ensures that the kind of founders that are getting your support also feel valued, also feel like they're not on this journey alone. And if you have promised to be there, just ensure that you're present and provide the necessary support or questions that they have, right? And at least also always have an open communication, whichever level you're in, because it also makes them feel that they're always, looked after. So yeah, actually acting like a co-founder. Fourthly is sometimes it's okay. You may not be needed, which means it doesn't mean that you have to actively be there as well, right? So if a founder comes and says, "Hey, I'm building this product because of this," and we've actually understood, and you feel like, this time around my comments might not be needed, it's also okay, right? Whether it's they found another expert in the field that has known the work, sometimes it's good to critique or give your ideas, but when you're not needed, it's also okay. It's very fine as long as you know the context in which they're dealing with and you can trust them with the process, right? Um, then lastly, to sum up all the things that I've said, which is you are a part-time co-founder, which means you don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone in the startup world has all the answers. But as the famous saying goes, action produces information, which means the more you act on the ideas that the founders have and the more you help them progress faster, it means that it's okay, even if you don't have the right answers, at least you're progressing towards the right direction. So because of that, at least here are a couple of things that you should consider, right? Number one is asking a lot of questions. I think questions in whichever context, whether it's with your customers, with any kind of stakeholder around the startup is very important, right? And try to be open to different kinds of answers that could lead you to the right direction, right? So asking founders, for example, who's your future customer and what's the problem you're trying to solve, and like really what they call radical candor, right? Trying to be very critical in terms of not just providing support, but also challenging them in their own thoughts, right? And by having this kind of good questions structured in every stage of the way, you're able to understand that the kind of answers you're getting is helping you progress over time. To have more context, right? So this is to all the mentors out there. It's okay if you don't have all the answers, but in order to go there, you need to act, you need to produce and generate information. Then also looking at the support that we said earlier, remember, systems are not the same as doing the work, right? Your role as a mentor is to set up the systems. You're not an employee, you're more like a part-time co-founder. So helping them set up their own decisions and ultimately not pushing your ideas on them is very critical, right? Because it shows you that oftentimes the kind of uh, mentors certain people have might you can even be really sure on your idea, right? But ultimately, the founder is in charge of their own ideas. So what you have to do as a mentor is usually open share your thoughts, your ideas, and sometimes try to tell them the challenges or the mistakes that they're making, right? But don't impose any idea. And in whichever process that you're supporting them on, try to understand why they need that support and do it in a more unbiased way, right? And by providing this kind of advice or the support that we're talking about, um, when you start giving them that support, so let's say it's a product development support and you're coming up with a UI UX design, right? Let's say they insist on a specific workflow and you might not agree with it, right? But do you need to impose on them? I don't think so, because ultimately it's their button to push. But what you have to do at least is sometimes mediate and know how to carry on with such things and at least continue to support them even if your idea has not been taken up, right? Because remember, we shouldn't take things very personally when it comes to startups. And yeah, sorry. So next one is don't be a discourager, be the empowerer, right? I think what separates great founders from the rest is they look at opportunities in every challenge, right? So you have to understand or to ask yourself in whichever step that you've taken, why is there an opportunity here? Why should we continue pursuing this? Because there are so many pitfalls it's always easy to identify a challenge. It's always easy to identify a problem, but the hardest part is identifying potentials, right? So encourage the teams, acknowledge their passion, don't kill ideas, right? However much crazy they sound, because it's usually the crazy ideas that actually end up uh, basically disrupting a lot of markets, right? So try to be always the encourager and the empower within the team and always setting up the pace for them to continue doing great work, right? So with this, I have come to the end of my session, and I would love to dedicate the rest of the time to at least get your perspectives and your questions before we, conclude on the session, so that I also get to see or understand what questions you might have and how you might need some kind of, thoughts from the team. So I see a question from Emmanuel. In many other African ecosystems, we see that most innovation hubs and accelerators are structured as social enterprises or NGOs. Very true. Often due to donor-driven funding models. While this enables impact-focused programming, it also limits their flexibility to directly invest in startups, unlike models we saw from the video shared with private accelerators such as Y Combinator. Given this structural limitation, what innovative models or hybrid approaches can be explored to allow hubs in Africa to become more financially sustainable and invest directly on their portfolio? This is an amazing question, Emmanuel. And I'll share what we're doing at Startup, right? So Startup is structured as a hybrid social venture. What it means is we have the NGO side, but we have also the private side. So we might do a program for an NGO where we get a grant, for example, we implement a certain project, but at the end, um, why we have the private entity is our startup support is structured in a way that we are having a skin in the game. So investing in the startups and actually having stakes helps you understand that you're not just supporting them, but you actually have an equity in those companies, which makes you treat it more like a business and less like a donor funded program. And when you look at most of these donor-funded programs, they're more of input-driven than output. They're more impact-driven than the business-driven, which means they would want to see, okay, 1,000 farmers getting impacted or 500 students getting access to books. But how does the startup actually prioritize building a scalable business while impacting their customers' lives, right? So I think my suggestion is that however much we can't immediately avoid that path, how can we set up more of a hybrid model where maybe the different kinds of investors we can bring or the different kinds of entities we can involve, if there's a private side as well, we're able to at least approach it in a hybrid model where we cannot avoid the NGO side, but we're able to push on the private side as well. It's going to be, it might take a bit of a time and we need to be patient, but eventually, when we start seeing this startups and we have successful models operating in the space, we're able to at least attract more of this capital, then be more private sector driven. But for now, it's something we can't avoid. That's how most of the hubs are funded. But eventually, if we're including or at least even partnering with other private entities, right? It's something that over the long run, at least we can sustain. But yeah, thank you for the question. Great observation there. I hope that answers your question. Feel free to add on the question in case you want me to extend there. Um, any other question, guys? Feel free to put your question on the chat box. Any questions, guys? You can feel free to unmute in case you want to say your question, and would love to hear it out. Yeah, I can see. So someone is asking, will we get the presentation you're using? Yeah, I think I can share it. Maybe if you've registered with your email on the call, I will definitely share. Any other questions? Thanks for the question, Biaka. So maybe before or as others are thinking about their questions, I would love now to pose a question for all of you here, right? Um, Based on the learnings that you've had on embracing the part-time co-founder role and how to actually effectively provide mentorship, whether it's on the learning on Y Combinator or even the things I've shared, I would love to hear how you will, one thing that you will apply to become a part-time co-founder based on the learnings that you've had in this session. So the chat box is open. Kindly share what are at least one of the learnings you've had, so that I would love to see what has impacted you the most and share resources accordingly based on how we can support you, or at least expound on some of them before we conclude the session. So yeah, kindly utilize the chat box and let's hear what you've picked up and what you start applying coming the month of June. Yeah, so let's put it on the chat box. I hope you guys are typing. Looking forward to hear your learnings on the chat box. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone share, but at least let's share that as we conclude the session today. And maybe let me just share a couple of things that you guys should consider before we conclude the session, and maybe that could be your takeaway. If it's one thing I would want you to remember in this session, is that mentorship is more of a long-term investment, which means the kind of relationship that you build with the founder goes beyond just a specific deliverable, right? You want to see things until the end of the specific support, right? So unless you have an end-to-end plan, right? Starting from number one, selection of the startups, right? Because as I said, if your salary is going into the startups that you're supporting, would you continue supporting them? Because you would say, I don't see a potential in the startup, right? So how is that changing? Then you need to think about the selection. Uh, Secondly is after the selection, you need to understand what is the journey of the startup like and what stage are they and what specific needs do they have, right? Is it on the product side? Is it identification? Is it on the side of finding them investors, right? Because we need to change our understanding just from I need to tell them what to do to actually have something tangible that we give them, right? So whether it's providing them a network with a specific investor, or it is actually supporting them with drafting a contract, or actually going to the field with them and engaging their customers, right? It's something that's tangible. It goes beyond just the word that you give them. And what happens is usually when they see you in the field, when they're seeing you engage like them, they have much more respect and also look at you as their equal, because now they're saying, oh, this person actually cares, this person actually wants to help us. So whichever opinion that you give, it actually becomes more like, a colleague than let's say someone hired like a supervisor or boss. So you select the right startups, you structure it in the right way, you support them in a tangible way, not just by providing them consulting services, then continue to track the progress. Are what you're supporting them actually being recorded, right? Did you support them, for example, in raising a certain amount? So you might have not supported them with coming up with the pitch deck and all, but maybe you were the one who introduced them to the investor. That's one of the ways you could support them, but at least tracking these KPIs, whether qualitative or quantitative, and at the end continuing to see that. And based on that, always document your success, because it is what you're going to use, whether when you're fundraising for a fund or you're sharing with a grant provider, how you provide your mentorship, because then you have more credibility over the startups that you support, because you're more hands-on, and that sets you apart from other providers, right? So I hope that this has provided you with some insights, and continue following our work with what we do. We usually post our learnings on our social medias, majorly LinkedIn, and look at also, if you go to our website, we have some of the startups that we support there. And yeah, I hope that with this, you'll start becoming a part-time co-founder, seeing the growth of your startups grow more effectively, and over time build more credibility to raise a fund, to become investors, but also to have successful startups that change the ecosystem. Uh, I hope to see that in the coming years, there's another Y Combinator coming out of the ecosystem in East Africa, and hopefully it would have become from this session or this impact. So yeah, looking forward to that. I could see there are some people who shared, so let me just read through what they've said, and so that others could pick up. So, Winnie said, how to mentor a student with a prototype. A student wants things on his or her way. Please advise. So here's the thing, right? One is when you say prototype, sometimes if you have a technical knowledge, it's okay to put some of your hands-on support, right? Whether it's programming, whether it's helping them purchase the material, right? But never take up a whole bunch of deliverable, because that then it makes it reliant on you to provide that support, right? So what you do is your work is to provide a system. So if it's starting the prototyping session, start with them, set up the initial wireframe, for example, if it's an app, and get initial feedback from customers. And once they understand that end-to-end process of how to prototype, leave it to them to continue doing it and you just then start tracking. But if you jump on the mud of actually doing it yourself, they might become reliant and say, oh, Win is going to do it for us, right? So that's number one. And a student who wants things his or her way, as I said, you can never change what they want by just telling them. But what you can do is initially just make sure you keep track of what you've told them and what the outcome is. Because usually, as I said, if you start treating them like a part-time co-founder, and let's say they're seeing you go to the field with them, engage customers, and have different kinds of contributions, they start treating you like a co-founder and not just another mentor, right? So that's something that I would advise on. Mark said, how can I help team reach a given market they had not thought of? So I think what I would do if I was you is if they have not thought about it and they are not feeling optimistic, why don't you go ahead and actually test it yourself? As we said, you're a part-time co-founder. So I'll give you an example. If you're working with, let's say, e-commerce, or I'm not sure, if you're working with in the agri-tech space, and they've only been focusing on crop farmers and not livestock, right? What I would have done is I would go and do initial interviews with some of the livestock farmers. I would develop a simple mock-up, do some testings, and get feedback, right? And I would take it to the founders and say, hey, this is what I've done. And this was the outcome of the study. This was the outcome of the pilot, and I think there's a potential there, right? And I don't think they will ignore the fact that you went a step ahead to do this analysis and you've gotten some feedback that's promising, right? So always think ahead and say if there's no capacity, always feel free to take it up and actually go that extra step to do it yourself. Um, Jawadia said, happy to be reminded about the hybrid model and the fact that we need to push more and more of our spaces hubs to become private driven side. That's very true. So when you look at Y Combinator, why they're very critical on their startups is they have their skin in the game. If you've invested in a startup, you're more invested. So always remember this, right? The salary aspect we've talked about. Think of it as I'm actually investing my time and resources on this startups, right? So how would you treat that? So when there's always a skin in the game, you become much more critical and much more, much more driven, but also invested in the idea. So that's great to hear. Joseph has said, personally, my key learnings has been developing support documents to help the founder and we track KPIs and other key aspects of the business. That's true. So sometimes startup founders might not have the right knowledge on documentations, setting up systems, whether it's a hiring funnel, whether it's a policy within their company and all that stuff. So that's quite important. Yes, Patricia, you'll get the recording of this. I think it will be sent. Okay, Emmanuel has another question. He said, another question is, in the hybrid model you shared, does a startup takes equity or explore alternative revenues or profit sharing? Give how long equity takes to realize ROI, especially for hubs in Africa. So when we invest in startups. Currently, we're venturing into using convertible notes, but currently, for the past 3, 4 years, we've been using what you call an EPA, which is an equity purchase agreement. It's a very founder-friendly contract where you get to have a buyback and a stake for the founders, and it could be achieved in a way that it's an equity, but it could be bought back by the founders in a given duration of time, right? But there's also another one which is called a base stake that could be bought back through different kinds of arguments, whether it's revenue share, whether it's a specific target, right? So I think exploring these kinds of contracts could help because that is taken by the private entity, right? So Startup has a private side which invests in the startups and uses these kinds of contracts to support them. So basically, we have not just equity, but also some kind of contribution or skin in the game. And based on that, we're able to actively support the startups that are within our network or within our portfolio. And I think ROI is quite tricky because sometimes you don't know when a startup will reach. So it could be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, sometimes even less. Sometimes a founder will buy you back early enough if they're fundraised, right? So it's hard because we're still trying to grow the database and see how the performances are. But just look at the life cycle of a startup, and in the region, it's usually between 5 to 7 years. But as a hub, it could be relatively lower if you're well equipped with resources and experts in the technical field as well. Okay. Bianca said we're developing the co-working space for startups in Dodoma. As most of our ecosystem were donor based, we're having challenge in adopting on taking equity on the startup as a model. I do understand, and sometimes it's inevitable, but in time or with different kinds of experiences, I know it will be better to also explore that private side to especially, catalyze the support of the startups. Um, Jane has said that she'll ask smart questions and don't give answers to bias them. Sometimes it's good to give answers, but it has to be from a more contextualized perspective, right? And Mark said some startups teams are rigid to their way of operations. Advise me on how to make them less conservative, especially when I'm not changing their prototypes, but just improving the idea. Yes, as I said, I think what will change that is a co-founder approach I've talked about, right? Because when you move away from just advising to being like their team member and you're actually contributing, they're much more open to getting that feedback, right? But if you don't have any context, or if they feel like, oh, this person is just there, they don't understand where we're coming from, but actually going through that experience yourself will definitely give you an upper hand. And sometimes it's just consistently telling them relatively right things, and they realize that, oh, this person is actually there to help us, right? But also doing it within an extended period of time where you actually grow personal relationships with them, and they're not just seeing it from the aspect of this person is just advising, but this person is actually invested in our idea. Okay, I see Sabra said, as a mentor, how best can I support founders in navigating personal leadership challenges, especially in context where vulnerability is often seen as weakness? I do agree it's quite hard, especially for founders that have personal challenges, whether it's monetary or other challenges, right? And I think there's no direct answer to this because you have to particularly grow a relationship with them. They become your friends, actually. When you look at most of the mentors at YC, they treat most of their founders as their colleagues, as their friends, and not just in a professional aspect. So I think with time, when founders actually get to, you know, get connected with you and see you work with them for an extended period of time, it actually becomes much more than just, professional. So I think that might take a bit of time and it might take a bit of investment to build a relationship. And that's why usually it's a lot of investors want to see that they actually like you as a person in your characteristics before they invest in you, because they know that they're going to work with you for years to come. So beyond professional aspect, if they can't become your friends, if they can't engage you on that level, then it becomes quite hard, right? So I think the core thing about that is just building a relationship. Um, so Patricia said that being my first time attendance of the masterclass, and I'm quite informed today learning about pitfalls and action plans to ensure. Love to hear that. Thank you very much, Patricia. Winnie said, where's the location of the co-working space? Okay, that's for Brian. Oh, okay. So Jane has asked a nice question. What's the role and the difference between consultant and mentor? So as I said, consultants just give advice, just words, right? So you'll tell a founder, do this, you should do that, these are challenging. But a mentor, or what I would like to call a part-time co-founder, actually pulls their sleeves and actually contribute. So I give a simple example. If it's getting customer feedback, instead of telling the as a consultant, telling the founder go and do 20 customer interviews, I would actually help the founder to go and do those interviews, right? So that would make me more of a mentor and more of a part-time co-founder. Um, nice. Hopefully we'll visit Biaka's co-working space soon when we're in Changali. Thank you, Emmanuel. Glad you find it informative. Uh, Yeah, I think Patricia, about the hybrid social model, I think you can search it online. A lot of people um, uh, have adopted it. But yeah, I think, sorry, there is a bit of, yeah. So you can check it out online and the information is definitely there. Okay, Nancy's question, I think that's the last one, says sometimes as an incubator or accelerator hub, it's hard to find mentors for their startups. Are there any localized mentorship models you can provide to get mentors? I think mentorship actually if you're a hub manager, for example, it's quite crucial that you hire a mentor that is going to act more like a part-time co-founder, right? So I think it should be, it's more like hiring for any role, right? You have to be on the lookout. I don't know any centralized platforms where you can access those people, but I definitely know that with the kind of connections or networks you might have with the startup associations in your region or your country, you can be able to get suggestions. I would say that those WhatsApp groups and those, like, ecosystems or associations are very important. But I suggest that when you're even hiring the right kind of people in your hub, you are like actively scouting or looking for people that are more likely going to embody this kind of support, right? So yeah, I think that would be my thought. So, looking at associations that already exist, it would be good to look at past founders, past investors, or current investors that would want to do mentorship. It's good to look at maybe people who have worked in startups, right? At least these kinds of exposure help you with having some kind of there's some starting point, right? But still, there are always people who are open to learning. So I think that should be a critical part of your hiring process when you're looking for the right mentors. Um, cool. I hope I was able to answer your question. And yeah, thank you very much for being part of the session. And I hope that you've learned a thing or two about being a part-time co-founder and understanding how uh, that can basically help you catalyze your support. And I think as as hub managers or hub workers here or mentors for startups, it would be a great thing for us to connect. So maybe before we leave, all of us could just share our LinkedIn handle here and follow each other's work and basically stay connected. So that in every learnings that we have, success that we have, it's good if we could share the different, learnings, challenges, but also successes, so that ultimately we're able to, grow our regional ecosystem bigger and have more successes, and eventually see more of East African Y Combinators coming up. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Feel free to share your LinkedIn handle before you leave and connect with other people. And until next time, this is the Start Hub Masterclass, and be on the lookout for the next session. And I'm sure through this, we're building a movement of not just founders, but innovation hubs that are at the bridge of startup success. And yeah, until next time, all the best, and let's continue being part-time co-founders and supporting our founders go from just 0 to 1 through the support that we provide. Thank you. Follow our social media handles on LinkedIn, Startup Africa, and see you on the next one. All the best, guys. I think I'll leave the call open for people to share their LinkedIn for the next like 5 minutes, then we can end the call.